appropriate manner.
Okay, thank you. Robin Miller, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll echo the Chairman's points about we need to pick up the pace on this because there's lots of us with lots of questions to ask, but also the importance of focusing on the governance aspects of this. I know there's lots been said and lots been printed about details, but I'm much more interested in the governance, and I'd like to step through starting with the setup of the unitary board through to the dismissal process and as quickly skip through some key points on that. I should declare a personal interest in that at 55 years old, I'm old enough to remember the setup of S4C and the joy that it brought to have an extra channel on the TV. At that point, I was still getting up out of the chair to press the buttons to turn over. But it's been a fantastic story for Wales, and I think this is so important. We could collapse this on to talking about individuals as we must and as is right, but equally we have to remember this has ripple effects right across what is now a really thriving and vibrant sector. So I think this is a tremendous success story which we're worried about here as well. It's not just the issues of governance. The Ogwen report in 2017, December 2017, recommended the setup of a unitary board. The government accepted those recommendations in April 2018. I think there's been some formal legislation laid now in November 23 towards transferring that now into statute. So the question I think I have for you, just looking at your standing orders, in fact, which were April 22, and I'll refer to these a number of times, but in April 22, Standing Order 4.4 says the board must secure the effective and efficient management of S4C and all its activities. A straightforward question then is, do you think that the shadow unitary board structure is working?
Yes is the answer to that.
Okay.
I think that compared to the old model of an authority and executive, which tends to create a relationship of where the non-executives would concentrate perhaps too much on holding the executive to account and on not providing sufficient support to the activities of the organisation. I think Irene was absolutely right to suggest that the unitary board model is a better one. I can speak from some experience of having been at Ofcom for 14 years, where there was a unitary board which did function in my time, and I'm sure still does function very effectively. And it does provide, I think, a better basis for cooperation and understanding between non-executive members who are there to scrutinise and to provide strategic leadership. And it's always a minority of executive directors who would sit on a unitary board. They are in a minority, that they are there as part of that, not as people who are being called in occasionally.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Jones, you made the point in response to an earlier question that relationship between the chairman and chief executive is vital, and that's reflected in all sorts of different governance structures. Do you think that the shadow unitary board structure is working?
Yes, and I would echo what the chair has said. I mean, from my background in commercial businesses as opposed to sort of public service businesses, that is best practice. And so I haven't been involved in the authority model, but for me, I have no doubt that actually a unitary board, and it'll be better when it is formally a unitary board, gets the best working relationship between the non-execs and the execs, plays to the strengths of both, and is the best way to take an organisation forward.
Okay. So 18 months, some 18 months after you were appointed into that structure, Mr. Williams, that was when the chief executive was appointed through the process. And so the question I have for you is, in your standing orders that I referenced earlier, in section 9.4, it says the chief executive and secretary must be appointed solely by the non-executive members of the board. Did that happen?
Yes.
It did. And sorry, Mr. Jones, did you want to make a comment on that at all?
That's correct.
Right.
We were both members of the appointment panel, as it happens.
Okay. Are you a non-executive member of the board as chairman? Forgive me.
Yes.
Okay, so in that case, when you're appointing somebody like a chief executive at that sort of level, my understanding is that it's not just a role. There is a statutory requirement, there are obligations for the role, but you're very often looking for somebody, to quote a famous actor, with a very specific set of skills. Was that the case with, in this recruitment exercise?
Yes, and to refer back to what the chairman mentioned earlier of my pre-appointment hearing, where I remember talking about the need for S4C to change, to reinvent itself, and there was a need there to do that. We certainly needed to change the way we operated, not as an organisation that simply saw itself as a linear broadcaster, but as a distributor of compelling content on a variety of digital channels. And I think that has been achieved. And I would certainly be, as I suggested earlier, be very confident about the progress that has been made in that respect. I think the problem that we've had is about the way in which
Let me come to that. I think you've described a challenge that the organisation faced and therefore the need for a certain set of skills within the chief executive. Did you have an individual in mind during the search for your chief executive?
No. We engaged the services of a recruitment agency to help us in the search, to ensure that we looked far and wide. And we had I don't remember the exact number of candidates in total, but it would be about, I think it would be about 12. And there was a variety there of people who had a large amount of experience within the broadcasting industry and people who had very much less, but had senior experience within other organizations doing other kinds of things. And we had as you would expect, a shortlisting process, interviews undertaken, and we came to the conclusion that Sian Doyle had something to offer.
Did you know Sian Doyle before her appointment as chief executive? Had you come across her in your 14 years of experience, for example, at Ofcom?
No.
No. Was it the case then that this was advertised widely, or was it a very targeted headhunting exercise, to use the...
Advertised widely in the media press and online with a variety of different channels, and then the recruitment agency to add weight to that, to look beyond, if you like, the obvious candidates.
Just to be clear, section 9.5 of the standing orders, I won't read it out here because it's quite lengthy. It's one of the more detailed clauses actually within the standing orders. You're happy that the process that was set out there for the appointment was followed?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So if we move the clock forward then, complaints had arisen, etc. At what point did you become aware then that complaints were being made about the chief executive?
Well, the first suggestion of a complaint was...
To be clear, I'm not interested in the nature of the complaint, it's the governance and therefore the fact of complaints.
The Bechtel letter to the chief executive in November. Between November and April, or rather probably took until December when we heard the first feedback about that, to the board's People and Remuneration Committee and to the board in its entirety, that progress was being made. But it was then on April the 28th that the formal letter from Bechtel came saying that actually things were worse now than they had been in November.
Okay. And that's roughly a 6-month period then, I think you're describing. Is that correct? You said November to April?
Not far off, yeah.
Okay. And in that period, Mr. Jones, I don't think you answered the chair's question earlier when he asked what date you'd become first aware of these complaints. Where within that, or did it precede that you became aware of complaints?
Well, I think the same as all the other members of the board. It was the original Bechtel letter in, I think it was actually December, I'm not sure.
November, December. About then. Okay.
And then the follow-up Bechtel letter at the end of April.
Was there ever any concern expressed to either of you as senior figures on the board of complaints about how those complaints were being handled? Did any other board members come to you and say, look, we ought to be handling this in a different way, something's not being done that should be done, etc.?
No is the simple answer to that. There was discussion at the board at different points as to how we should proceed. For instance, when that original letter on the 2nd of December was shared with us by Sian Doyle, and we had a discussion about it and decided that the appropriate response would be to leave it to Becto had written to the executive. They were offering to cooperate with the executive to help deal with the problems, and we thought it was the appropriate response to leave that to them. When the second letter came on April the 28th, a different response was required.
Moving now forward to the departure and dismissal, are you happy that I couldn't find in the standing orders a process or recommendations or clauses which dealt with the dismissals, but are you happy that the dismissal process has complied with whatever adopted or approved internal policies you may have, or indeed external best practice for that kind of situation? Are you happy that that was followed in this case?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Jones, is that?
Yes, and we did take detailed legal advice at all stages to ensure that was the case.
I mean, that was my next question, because I think 4.9 says the board can appoint or arrange for assistance from advisory committees in order to receive advice on any issues relating to the board's role. So you did, apart from the report that we have before us, you did take advice, did you, on this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. It seems to me then, if I could draw my questioning to a close, Chair, there's this perennial question, especially at board level, you have this confluence of good people and good structure. And the question in my mind I'm asking is, if we have the right structure, do we have the wrong people? Is that your understanding of the difficulties that we have today?
Well, I think if you read the Capital Law report, you find a very clear answer to that question. As I quoted earlier, the Capital Law report describes the behaviour of the Chief Executive as confrontational, abusive and inconsiderate.
I can understand why you might say that, but it also begs the question then why the whole report was suppressed and it wasn't made available to all members immediately in its full format.
Well, that's... I thought I'd sort of dealt with that earlier. When Becto came to us and described the culture of fear that existed within the organisation, they said that they had evidence that would be significant enough to provide an individual grievance, but the individuals were not prepared to do that because they were scared, and that they had to have, if they were going to come forward, they had to have a mechanism which protected their identity and their privacy. Now, once you do that, if you give that assurance to the staff, you can come forward, you can talk to lawyers within Capital Law without fear that what you say is going to be repeated either to the board or to the executive team or to anybody else within S4C, then they would have the confidence to do that. If we hadn't provided that, I don't think the exercise could have been undertaken at all.
The final question,
therefore, you have to maintain the anonymity at the end of the process, and therefore you have to provide a report which, as I say, was very difficult to do, that takes out information that makes it possible for people to be identified.
But thank you very much, Chair.